Well, it is time for a proper book review, and today is February 9th, and the Super Bowl will start here in a little bit. And not being a sports fan myself, I have more book stuff cluttering my mind, so I don't have room for sports statistics. So I will be reading and possibly recording some additional book reviews this evening rather than watch the Baphomet worshiping spectacle. But in all seriousness, I do find it anytime something of great import like this happens, when you have I think Trump announced the other day that he was going to be at the Super Bowl, and anytime something like that happens, I think the threat level goes up in my mind significantly of false flag attacks and that sort of thing. And in light of that, I thought this might be time to revisit Body of Secrets by James Bamford. So this is Body of Secrets, Anatomy of the Ultra-Secret National Security Agency, from the Cold War through the dawn of a new century. And of course, this is from the best-selling author of The Puzzle Palace. And this was originally published in, I believe, May of 2001. And I find it interesting that actually says, some books don't say, they'll just say the date. They'll just say it was from 1995 or whatever. But it actually says May of 2001. And you'll see why that's interesting here in a minute. Overall, this is pretty straightforward. It's all about The Puzzle Palace. One of his other books I have that I haven't reviewed yet is all about the history and the founding of the National Security Agency. And if you don't know already, the NSA is akin to the CIA, and some would argue even more significant, has even greater significance and greater power in covert operations and weird stuff happening over the world than the CIA. And then this book follows up on his original book. This is all about stuff that the NSA has done, things that have happened to the NSA over the years. But two main things that I wanted to talk about in this is mainly the mention of a couple of false flag activities in here, or events that were in here. One being proposed false flag event, and one that was, I think, a failed false flag attempt. Now, first off, many of you who've heard of this book, you might have heard about it by way of hearing about the Northwoods documents. And the Northwoods papers, or the Northwoods documents, are contained in here. And I'm trying to think if he actually has, I think they might be included in this version, might be included like scans of the whole documents. But what they are is the Northwoods papers, or Northwoods documents, were a proposal by, I believe, McNamara at the time, to then President Kennedy. This was all in like 1962. The idea that they really wanted to go to war with Cuba. But the problem was the United States, big country, Cuba, little country. And if the United States attacks Cuba, that doesn't look so good. So you kind of have that with most of your citizens having this mentality of wanting to root for the underdog. It doesn't look so good when you attack the little guy, especially if it is a war of straight up aggression. Now, if you can make it look like the little guy was stupid enough to attack you, then you can get public sentiment on your side, and you could actually go into another country and make that a little bit more palatable to your general population. And that's what the Northwoods documents are all about, is it proposes a few different ideas for how this could be accomplished. And the main two that stuck out in my head all these years later is, one is remotely flying a plane over Cuba and getting Cuba to shoot this down by deliberately flying it through their airspace and saying it's full of college students on their way to a vacation somewhere. And then when it gets shot down, then of course all those deaths get blamed on Cuba. And then of course the United States, the general public, begs their government to then retaliate against Cuba. And then the other scenario, and this is proposed, I believe, as kind of an add-on to that initial Northwoods thing, is this is part of the Northwoods document, sorry. It's a kind of an add-on to the whole aircraft being shot down is this idea of having a sniper in the DC area, and I think he mentioned some other cities where you could have this high-profile sniper just taking people out, and ultimately when he's caught, he turns out to be a Cuban national, which of course gets everybody upset, and once again, everybody has their hatred reinforced towards Cuba, and it justifies the war and whatever else you're wanting to do at that point. So that is the Northwoods documents, and that is worth it alone for this book to read up on that and understand what that's all about. And of course, many of you watching this now, you can't help but see the similarities between 9/11 and the proposed Northwoods attack. Now, thankfully, the only reason we know about that is because, well, one, it's been declassified, but also because Kennedy said no to it. Which that also makes you wonder about a lot of other things. But Kennedy said no to the Operation Northwoods, so they got shut down. But obviously, in light of this coming out in May of 2001, well before September 11th, it does make you wonder if somebody was trying to get this out there before that event so that people would have something to chew on in regards to that. Also interesting, I heard him interviewed, James Bamford, on the Diane Rehm show around the time that this book was, when he was going on his publicity tour for the book, and that was actually after 9/11. And when he was on that tour and he was talking to Diane Rehm, she was a NPR host that had a morning slot in I think all over the country, but she would always interview an author as part of her segment. And she was interviewing James Bamford. And he was going over this book and all the information about it. And the Operation Northwoods came up. And Diane Rehm was horrified because immediately, as soon as he described it, she immediately saw the similarities. And she said, "You don't think something like 9/11 could be?" And he was like, "Oh, no, of course not." And that was that. And they changed the subject and went right along. So that's definitely one of those gems in here that's definitely worth being aware of. And I think the best antibiotic, if you want to call it that, against false flags is knowledge. The more that it's kind of like a magic trick. You can't, if everybody knows how the sawing a woman in half trick is done, you can't really get away with performing it over and over and over. So the more those things are, the more awareness there is, the harder it is for these guys to pull off these schemes. And the less control that less centralized control there is of media, mass media, the harder it is to convince people of this. Because now, thankfully, we have a lot of other outlets where it's easy for people to question things that they couldn't do before. So, one other thing, and that is the failed false flag attack mentioned in this. Now, he spins it slightly different, but that is the attack on the USS Liberty is mentioned in this book. And I was actually surprised. I read this, a fair amount of this, actually on a flight from Dallas to Lubbock when I first got this book. And I was shocked about, I'd never heard about the USS Liberty before, and I actually read this after 9/11. And as I was reading that section on the Northwoods documents, I was like, holy crap. I already had a lot of doubts at that point, but then reading that and reading that had actually something almost identical to that had been proposed, very interesting. So the USS Liberty, and I won't go into all the specifics of the attack here because there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of people who've done way more work than I can do here in a book review on this. But the USS Liberty was a Navy ship that had a secret mission of being an intelligence gathering ship for the NSA. So it was a Navy ship, but it actually had NSA personnel on board to decode and listen in on other radio traffic. And it was one of the first ships, I think, capable of receiving satellite communications. But overall, it was an almost unarmed ship. It had like 50 caliber machine guns and very limited defensive capabilities because all it was mainly was just an intelligence gathering ship just sitting out at sea gathering data. So it was attacked by fighter planes and torpedo boats and almost sunk by Israel. And in fact, when they did the aircraft attack with rockets and napalm, killing, I want to say, at least 35. I think they injured 171 sailors in that, and then killed like 34, 35. I mean, it was bad. And I remember reading about this in 2002, I think was when I got the book, and I was shocked that I'd never heard of that. And I'd never heard about the USS Liberty attack, or any of the things related to that. And I don't think I'd ever heard of Israel presented in any light other than highly favorable. So that also kind of shocked me. But basically that Israel attacked this intelligence gathering ship with the intent to sink it with all hands on board, and only through the heroic efforts of the crew were they able to stay afloat and limp off to Greece without any assistance. And it's in Body of Secrets, James Bamford recounts all the attack on the ship and what all went down, but he presents it from the angle of this ship was picking up communications from Israel about war crimes committed against, during the, I think it was a 6-day war. And that may well be the case. I don't doubt that. I'm sure there were war crimes committed in that war, and I'm sure these guys intercepted communications relative to that. But I don't think that was the entire purpose of sinking this ship, or trying to sink this ship. Years later, there was a documentary put out by the BBC, I think it was called Operation Cyanide, where they claimed they had uncovered additional documents about how this was supposed to be sunk and blamed on Egypt. And if it had gone down with all hands on board, they would have blamed it on Egypt, and it would have brought the United States into the 6-day war on the side of Israel against its enemies in the Middle East. So fascinating stuff in here. It's definitely worth getting just for those 2 sections. But again, I think anytime something's happening like the Super Bowl or whatever, it's always a good idea to be aware of the high probability of, anytime some major event like that, the more people that are on high alert, the less likely it is that somebody's going to actually carry out something like an attack on people for that purpose. But just remember, especially when you read books like this, that the neocons and the NSA folks and all those guys have been dying to have a war with Iran for going on 25 years or so now, if not more than that. So anytime there is some major cataclysm, you could bet that people really want to blame it on Iran so they can do that. And I'm not saying that as an Iran sympathizer or anything. I'm just saying that as a purely neutral party in that we really have to think about. There are people in our country that really want to go to war with Iran and will use all kinds of trickery in order to do it. So excellent book, and I apologize for my rambling commentary there, but I think that is important on the eve of the Super Bowl just because. So anyway, hope you all are having a good weekend, and hope you all that have just joined the channel enjoy the content. Bear with me. I post a lot of book reviews and commentary and all kinds of crazy stuff with my kids. So anyway, thanks for enjoying the channel, and thanks for supporting the channel, and thanks for watching.